Since the dawn of time, when man took his first steps outside of the cave environment and started cooking over an open flame, rice pudding has been among the most controversial of all the dishes. It's a dessert. No, it's a meal. Gentlemen, rice pudding is a dessert, but it's also a great way to have a delicious meal on the trail, especially the way that we're going to make it today. I really love this kind of rice pudding for any time, really, when I'm on the trail. Mostly I have it for breakfast. It's got lots of whole grain, it's high in fiber, it gives you great energy, but it's also really delicious as a dessert or for any time that you like it. So let's get started. We'll go through the ingredients that you need to make this delicious dish, the cookware that you'll need and kitchen appliances that will make it easier for you, and then we'll go through the steps of how to cook, dehydrate, and rehydrate in the field so that you can make this yourself and enjoy it while you're on the trail. To make this spicy brown rice pudding dish, we'll need 6 cups of unsweetened almond milk, a half cup of pitted dates, 1/3 cup of maple syrup, but I like to use what's known as either grade A light or fancy grade. It's a lighter colored, less maple flavored kind of a maple syrup that tastes more like a sugar. It's really delicious. We'll need 1 cup of uncooked brown rice, a half cup or about 8 ounces of raisins, 1/4 teaspoon of salt, 2 tablespoons of ground ginger, 1 teaspoon of pure vanilla extract, 1 large or up to 3 small cinnamon sticks, 2 tablespoons of maple sugar, 1 vanilla bean, and 1 to 2 tablespoons of ground ginger. I like to use 2 because I like mine extra spicy. We're also going to need a few specialized appliances to make this dish. You'll need a blender or Vitamix, and then you'll need a food processor with a chopping blade, or my preference is to use the Vitamix with the dry chamber on it that's used for milling grain. It really makes the work a lot faster and easier, but either one will work. And of course, since we're going to be dehydrating this, we're going to be using a dehydrator. To get started, we're going to take the dates and put them in a bowl and then cover them with about 3/4 to 1 cup of boiling water. Make sure that the dates are covered as much as possible with the hot water. And then cover to keep the heat from escaping while we move on to our next step and set it aside. Next, we want to get a medium saucepan. And we're going to add the rice, the salt, and the almond milk. And then we're going to want to bring that to a boil. Once you see that it's really starting to boil, you don't want it to boil over. So turn the heat down. On a scale of 1 to 10, put it to about a 2. Put in your cinnamon, the sticks only, not the powder. Give everything a stir. and then leave it simmering like that. But after you see it starting to calm down and it's just boiling very lightly, take the lid and put it on, but you want to put it at an angle so that the steam can escape, but so that it still is tented enough to hold in a good amount of the heat. So I would say that that is somewhere a little bit more than 1/8 of an inch, but not by more than about 1/4 of an inch, so that it still holds in the heat, but so that a lot of the vapors can escape without causing it to boil over. Set your timer for 1 hour. Stir a few times during that hour, and then come back and remove the lid. After about ½ hour to 45 minutes, the dates should be softened enough that you can now add them to your Vitamix or blender. And then what we're going to do is we're going to blend them into a paste. And we'll be using that to add to the cooked rice pudding near the end of the batch. Now, if it turns out that while you're trying to blend up the dates, that the blender kind of goes out of control and aerates so much that the dates don't really get blended up, it's okay to add a little water to it while it's in the blending process. Just make sure that when you do that, you add only enough to get the job done. Otherwise, later, when we get to other steps, it's just going to make them take longer because the added water is going to just have to be evaporated or dehydrated out anyway. At the end of the hour, remove the lid. Give everything a little stir. And then you're going to take the vanilla bean and you want to split that right down the middle. Then you want to take the bean, open it up where you split it. Take your fingernail, going backwards, and just kind of scrape off as many of the vanilla beans as you can get. See that? Just kind of drop them into the pot. Give it another go. And just drop the entire bean in there after you've scraped off. Set your timer for about another hour. It might not take all that time, but you have to ask yourself a question at this point. How lazy of a cook are you going to be? Because if you stay on top of this and you're diligent about it, you won't get very much pudding sticking to the bottom of your pot. If you prefer to just be lazy and kind of give it a stir every 10 or 15 minutes, you'll be fine with your end result, but you will have a decent amount of rice that's going to wind up stuck to the bottom of your saucepan, and you know, that will just reduce your yield a little bit. So what you want to do at this point is, if you're going to be staying on top of it, stir it every couple of minutes
and give it about an hour. Right now you can see that it's still quite runny. So all we're really doing at this point is giving the rice more time to soften and for the liquid to start to evaporate until it becomes like a thick oatmeal kind of texture. And that's when we know we're going to be near the end. And in my experience, it's taken roughly 45 minutes to an hour. If you'd like, you can also bump the temperature up a little bit on a scale of 1 to 10, where we've been at a 2. If you want to put it up to about a 3, you can also do that. But the higher you put the temperature, the more frequently you're going to have to stir in order to keep the rice from sticking to the bottom of the pot. So that's really a matter of personal choice. Okay, it's been about an hour, and I've been pretty good about things, stirring frequently. So I really don't have any problems with very much sticking to the bottom here. It's doing pretty well. So now comes the easy part. After we give it one more stir, just to make sure nothing's stuck. And that's going pretty well. It's time to add the last of the ingredients. Now, if you positively can't resist and you're just going to eat this batch and there's nothing you can do about it, and later you'll make some more for the trail, you can add the raisins at this point. But for the trail, what we're going to do is add the raisins last, after we finished our dehydration. When we're packaging this up, we're not going to add them now. So in goes our vanilla. The maple syrup. Maple sugar. The ginger. And our cinnamon. Now we're leaving the cinnamon in the stick form and the vanilla bean in there for now. We're going to remove those just before putting into the dehydrator after it's cooled down, because you don't want to burn your fingers right now. But let's stir all this in, and you'll see that even though we've added a little bit of liquid to this mixture, it's really thickened up quite nicely, and it's starting to take on the perfect color. And I can smell that ginger and the cinnamon. Oh, is this going to be good? So now, the last ingredient from the Vitamix is the date paste. And you see, by making the texture just watery enough, it basically all but a tiny bit that I'll just kind of scrape out and put in there with a little spatula, but almost all of it comes out. But you need it to be like that, like a paste. If you make it too runny, it's okay. It's just that it's going to, again, thin out what you're putting into the pot so much that you're going to then have to start cooking it again for a while to thicken it up. But if you do it just right, it comes pretty much right out of the Vitamix. You can stir it up. Give it just a couple of minutes to thicken. And this is ready to go into the dehydrator, except for cooling off a little bit first. Okay, there we go. Now you can see it's all uniform in color. So everything got mixed in really well, and you see it's much thicker than it was when we started off cooking. You see how it tends to cling? A nice coating stays right there on the spatula. Some of it falls off, but then look at that, there's a good amount that stays on there, and you really have to knock it off to get it down to the bottom and see where the spatula is. That's exactly what you want, like a very thick oatmeal kind of a texture. It's exactly what you're shooting for. So now that everything's all thickened up and stirred in, if we're going to eat this, this would be the time to add the raisins, but since we're not, I'm just going to turn off the heat and we'll let it sit. I'll cover it over maybe so that it won't get a big thick skin on the top, and we'll let it sit for around an hour or so, just so it's cool enough that we can add it to the dehydrator tray without, you know, maybe melting it or something like that. I'm not sure exactly what the temperature is here, but just to be on the safe side, and also so that it'll be cool enough to handle so that we can pull out the vanilla bean and the cinnamon sticks when we're adding it to the dehydrator. I'll also give it a few stirs during that time to help with the cooling process. Now that the pudding is cooled, we're ready to scoop it into the fruit roll trays and then put it into the dehydrator for drying. You want to scoop it in so that it's no thicker than about 1/4 of an inch or less. So what I do is I kind of pour some onto the tray and then I spread it around, and right there is one of the vanilla beans. So we're going to take that out and dispose of it. And if I spot the cinnamon stick, I'll do the same thing. Set the dehydrator for 8 hours at 145 degrees, and then when the 8 hours has passed, we're going to flip it over for at least another 4 to 8 hours, somewhere in that range. It generally takes between 12 and 15 hours to do the batch. Now that it's been at least 8 hours, let's take a look and see how we're doing here, and we can flip this at the halfway point. So you can see it looks like it's pretty well done. It's got like a fruit leather kind of a texture to it. But now that I flipped it over, you can see right here in this area that this part is still on the moist side. That's the reason why you want to flip it after it's about halfway done. All right, let's check and see what we've got here. Okay, that looks pretty good. This is exactly what we're shooting for. It should come out almost like a dried skin that will crackle in some places, but also be kind of on the fruit rolly kind of a texture in others. Now we're just going to take these and divide them into small pieces that will be easy to use for grinding up in the food processor or Vitamix, working with small amounts at a time. Add the torn pieces of the rice pudding into your Vitamix or food processor. Especially if you're going to be using the food processor, you want to keep the portion really small, because again, these kind of leathery textured pieces will really make a lot of work for the food processor. But the Vitamix handles it pretty well and pretty quickly. I'm going to be turning this up to, slowly up to about the level of between 3.5 and 4.5. Every, few seconds, about 20 or 30 seconds, stop and check out the texture. And I'm not sure how well you can see that in there, but this is what you're shooting for. Something that's about the texture of like a gravel, I'd say. And I'll show you what it looks like in the bowl, but this looks like this is pretty well done. If you over process it, you're going to accidentally turn it into powder and dust, and you really don't want that.
On the left, this is what the pudding looks like after it's been torn into smaller pieces, but before it's been processed through the Vitamix. And on the right, you'll see what it looks like as the final product. It should be about the size of gravel, let's say 1/4 inch squared for most of the pieces, but some will be powdery and some will be a little bit larger. That's exactly what you're shooting for. After cooking enough pudding to make about 32 batches, I'm weighing it out by dividing it into 2-ounce portions of the pudding and about 0.9 ounces of raisins. And then I'm placing that into plastic storage bags and noting on them that I'll need to add a 1/2 cup of hot water and wait about 15 minutes for them to rehydrate so that I'll be ready to prepare this on the trail. I've had good luck with this remaining shelf stable for quite some time, but I suggest that if you're not going to be using it right away, put it in the freezer and it'll keep for at least 8 months to a year, and then take it out right before you're going to be using it on the trail. To rehydrate, we'll add the 1/2 cup of hot water. Now when you do this, you want to add some of the water, most of it, because it is going to take around a 1/2 cup, but stop at a little bit less than that. And you can see here that just enough to cover it is about all you're shooting for. Close it up. Make sure if you're using freezer bag cooking, close it up. And we're going to place it in our cozy for about 15 minutes. First, we'll just give it a little mix, and then we're going to place it inside. And after about 2/3 of the way through, we'll probably agitate it a few more times to give it a good mix, and we'll see how it comes out. Okay, I've waited the 15 minutes, and again, I did agitate and mix it up a little bit as it was going through, once or twice. But yeah, that's starting to look exactly like it's supposed to. Now, normally on the trail, I just put this inside of my hot water cup and line the cup with the bag like this, and then I eat directly out of that. But so that we can take a look at it here, let's see if I can get it to come out. Oh yeah, that looks good. You can see that it's all rehydrated, but there's no water running around the outside. It's got a nice, soft texture to it. Perfect. Exactly back to the same way it was before we dehydrated and rehydrated it. And of course, the most important thing is, let's see how it came out here. You can taste the cinnamon, the ginger, the raisins are nice, and of course the rice
gives it a nice filling texture. It's delicious.
We've gone over the ingredients and the instructions for cooking, dehydrating, portioning, and rehydrating your spicy cinnamon ginger rice pudding. Remember, flip your pudding over when it's halfway done to assure that it's fully and evenly dehydrated, and remember to grind it into gravel-sized pieces, not powder, before bagging, and you'll always have a great result. This rice pudding has quickly become one of my favorite dishes. You can have it anytime, as a meal or for dessert. I'm sure it'll become one of your favorites too. See you next time.